Welcome everyone to the June Focus Series. I can't believe we're halfway through the year already. Today we're going to be focusing on planning together with clients. Now I know that all of you have your own client engagement process and the way in which you plan with clients. What we're going to be sharing today is just some practical tips. If you are engaging and planning together with clients, some ways that you can use Asset Map and set that up prior to those engagements to really streamline it and create the space for a more engaging, collaborative planning experience with clients. But I wanted to start by just talking about some of the why. What are some of the benefits to planning together with clients? And this really represents a shift from presenting a plan to a client that we've created for them to building the plan and collaborating with them in that engagement. So we're talking about, working through all the options, all the levers that you have to move to come up with the best possible plan for that client. And some of the first benefit is that it really promotes engagement. Clients that are involved in the planning process, they will be far more engaged in that. They, working through the options together with us. So one of those benefits is it really enhances and promotes engagement in that session. But it also saves time. Often we create a plan for a client, or planners will say, present the plan to a client, and something comes up in that conversation that then requires us needing to sort of rework the plan. By building the plan together with the clients, we can sort of avoid that extra step of working through it again. And it enhances the client experience. Clients that are involved in the planning feel empowered, they feel educated and more equipped to make the decisions that move them forward. And it leaves them with a much more enhanced experience that they've been part of the planning process and built the plan together with you. But probably the number one most important key benefit is it becomes their plan. Instead of our plan for them, they take ownership of the plan. They together with us as their guide came up with the options that work best for them. And we know that clients that are part of the planning process, that build the plan together with you, are far more committed to the plan and committed to taking the actions and the steps that move them forward because they've worked on it together with you. So those are some of the key benefits. Now we're going to go into asset map and target maps, and I'm going to work through some of the things that you can do prior to those engagements to really set up the space for a co-planning, collaborative engagement with the client. We are, as Benny mentioned, going to be covering quite a bit in a short amount of time, but we will provide you with a list of everything we covered today and where to get more information on it. So as we go through it, perhaps think about, are there certain key elements that you want to bring into your process, and make a note of those, and then we'll go into more info on that after the session. Right, I'm going to jump across into Asset Map. Right. Any just a thumbs up that you can see the map?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Perfect. All right. So these engagements might be online. You might be using Zoom or Teams and having an online engagement with the client, or you might be sitting face to face and using a screen, to project on, or even iPads. I know a lot of planners are using iPads now and working through that with the client on an iPad. One of the first things that is good to check in with the client is how well they can see the screen. So often we could be on, quite a large screen on our side. This is specifically in online meetings. They might be on a sort of smaller screen on their side. So just checking in around, can you see everything? Do I need to zoom in a bit more? I like to keep it at, 100% as a minimum on the Zoom level, but then to adjust depending on how the client can view the screen. Another key thing is the menu bar on the left and the sidebar on the right is to keep those closed unless you're using them, just to create more space for the map on the screen. And then if you haven't used F11 before, if I select that, you'll see, let me just click, and then F11, you'll see that it just takes away that bar at the top and the bar at the bottom, just really using the space on the screen, and removes that distraction of what those menu bars are at the top and the bottom. So that's a key tip, F11, and you can hold escape to close that again. All right. But first thing you'll notice on the map is that we have a new sample client for today's session. So we have Sean and Shelley Johnson today. And in the asset map itself, we want to show a client, their current picture, where they are today, what we know about them. But we also want to add financial blocks prior to the meeting for the things that we want to talk about, or the items we need more information on, or the gaps that we want to open up conversation around. And you'll see here on the screen, I've added two, and you can use the free text fields here to put in things like let's discuss, or even to add in emojis. You can see I've added in a flag here, but you can add in emojis to really draw attention to the elements that you want to engage the client on. And just so you know, to add an emoji, you can right click in any one of these free text boxes and select emoji, and then pick the one that you want to add into your map. So I've seen some really colorful maps with lots of emojis, but it's a great way of just checking in, this is sorted, or this is something we want to discuss. So first tip is set up the asset map with the financial blocks that you want to explore more with the client, and have that set up prior to the session. You can also always use the marker tool. This is a great way of guiding the conversation, whether you're doing an online meeting or even, sitting in a room where you've got it up on a screen, or even using an iPad, because you might be talking about something on the left, the client might be focused on something on the right of the screen. The pen is just a great way of guiding the discussion, keeping the client focused, and bringing them into the conversation. This is what we want to talk about now. For those of you that like keyboard shortcuts, you can always select Control-M to turn on the marker, and Escape, and it'll clear everything that you've drawn. So using the marker throughout asset map and target maps to just guide the discussion as you work through it. Another feature that you can use to show a client their current map, but then also reveal the conversation or the blocks that you want to take further, or have a conversation with the client on, is using the hide and show feature. So if you select this tick box here in the top right hand corner, you'll see that I can select certain blocks and I can hide them, so that when I start the conversation with the client, they can't see those blocks, and we start with this is your current picture. Then I can always toggle it on to reveal what's hidden. So I could say here, I want to toggle visibility, and I want to show the hidden blocks. I can then also unhide those blocks by again clicking on that tick box, selecting the two, and unhide in one go. So that's a great way of starting with the current picture, but then also reflecting. These are the things I want to expand more on, have a conversation with. So whether you're using emojis or the text to say let's discuss, or the hide and show feature, it's about showing a client where they are today and then opening up the conversation, and you can have that done before you sit down and engage with them. Another key point is creating layouts prior to these engagements with the client. So you'll see at the moment we're looking at Sean and Shelley Johnson, but they also have a family trust, and Shelley has her own business. Now, of course, I can toggle between them at the top by deselecting Sean, selecting Shelley and the business if I want to have a conversation with them about this. But I can also create layouts prior to the meeting. And the purpose of that is that I can then flip through the different layouts, which is a great way of just not getting distracted by selecting and deselecting, but it's also a great way of planning out that conversation. I want to have a conversation with Sean and Shelley first about their picture. Then I want to explore with Shelley and her business and how those two relate to each other. So if I want to go ahead and save this as a layout, simply select what I want on that layout, right click again, select layouts, and here you can see I can save a current layout or toggle between existing layouts that I've already created. So here I can say I want to save this layout as Shelley and business and create it. And now if I want to flip between the layouts, instead of selecting and deselecting at the top, I can click on layouts and I can jump back to the default and apply. Then I'm looking at Shelley and Sean. Or I can flip into layouts again and jump back to Shelley and the business. Okay, so you can see how you can save and create these layouts, whether it's for one individual or individual in a company or trust in a company, to guide the conversation that you want to have in that engagement with the client. Also, you only need to create the layouts once, and they will then also be available in reporting. So you can see here under asset map, we've got the default layout, which is always the two spouses. And then I've got Shelley and the business and the trust in the company, and I can simply select which ones I want to include in reporting. You can even save layouts of one individual by themselves or everyone together if you want to. All right, turn that off and go back to this one. So the last key tip I want to point out on the asset map before we jump into target maps is to think about what are the capturing checks that I want to do to ensure that once I get into target maps, I can really streamline that process. And there's always three things that we like to check. The first is on capital, disability, or critical illness. We want to be sure here that we've got the benefit interval and periods correct. So we want to always say on a capital disability that the benefit interval is lump sum and years 1, that it will pay out in year 1 if the client becomes disabled. We want to go ahead and do the same for critical illness. Again, we want it to be lump sum years 1, so that when we get into target maps, it seamlessly pulls that in year 1 in the event of an illness or disability. If we pop over to income protection, here we want to note that it's usually a monthly benefit and that benefit will continue to pay out until a certain age. Typically it's 65, 70, some or even whole of life. So we always want to pop in there monthly, end age, and when it's going to end. And the other key point on income protection is to think about whether that benefit is going to keep up with inflation. Most of those do. So here we can pop in, inflation into the COLA on the income protection so that when we're in target maps, we don't have to alter it there. It's done already here in the map. Yeah. So those are the two on the insurance side. And then the third thing to think about is if the client is contributing to any investments, that we've captured those contributions prior to going into target maps. And there we can just simply select the retirement fund, and you can see there's the annual contribution. So not so important to do the start and end age. We can, move that around when we're in target maps. We want to make sure that amount is here. So when we go into target maps and create those, it's all seamless. All right. Those are the things that we wanted to point out in asset map itself. I'm going to pop over into target maps. Any questions now? Should I just jump ahead to target maps?
No, I think let's carry on and get through the stuff first, and then we'll deal with the questions.
All right, perfect. All right, so let's take a look at target maps. Here I've created a couple of target maps for these clients. I've looked at retirement as well as loss of life and disability for each of them. Now, the key point here when planning together with the client is we want to work through all of the levers and variables that we have. For example, we could be saving more, we could be spending less, we could work longer, we can take on more risk. But there's also other scenarios, for example, showing a client if they've sold their business, the impact of that, or if they kept the business but continued receiving an income, or properties, sales of properties in the future, or renting out parts of the property. So the conversation here is about how do we enable a space where you, together with the clients, can work through those different variables and options and find the right combination for that client so that they can take the steps to move forward. So let's start with the retirement target map. And I'm just going to talk through some of the things you can do in each tab prior to that engagement to really allow for less clicking, less adding, but give the same engagement that you can work through all of those options. So the first thing you'll see here is under the what you want section, you can set up different retirement income options. And the idea is to have that conversation with the client around what works best for them. But here you can have that set up already, as well as having additional line items for travel or medical or any other needs you think that you would like to open up a conversation with the client about. You can have those line items set up here already so that you're simply selecting or deselecting as opposed to adding it all from scratch in your session. So here I can immediately show the client the impacts of drawing at 70% of their current income, or if I change that to 50%, what is the impact that has? And there we see it goes from 51% to 72% funded. So you can see how by setting it up prior to the session, we can work through those options and find the best one for the clients. You can also reorder here. So I can move it up to the top if that's the one the client's going for, and move the travel, and all of the reporting will keep the order that you put it in here. Right. Then if we pop over to the What You Have tab, Key things to think about here prior to the meeting is what are we including and not including? And again, that's a conversation we want to have with the client. What can we put towards this goal? We can also, prior to the session, think about if the client is contributing. So here the client's contributing to unit trust and retirement funds. We can think about whether the client is escalating that contribution on an annual basis. It'll default to 0, but if the client is committed to escalating those contributions each year, we can put it in here under the COLA to show that escalation and the impact of that. Again, we can also reorder, so we can put it in the order if we want to put, retirement funds at the top. We can drag them up, we can drag the unit trust down a bit, and again, that will pull through into the what it means tab, as well as the reporting on this target map. If I then go across to what it means, here it's going to give us a summary on the left of what you want, on the right of what you have, and it's going to be in the order that you reordered those line items in. And then I'm going to pop over to the cash flow details. So I want to talk a little bit about this tab. We do get a couple of questions around, what is it showing? How do I engage the client on that? So the first thing you'll see, this graph at the top is starting from when the client retires. And it's essentially showing an income statement. Each of these bars represents the income the client requires, or you could say the what you want section. So everything you've put in the what you want section, these bars will reflect that need year on year on year, in this case from 65 till 100. And then it will show how long the client can sustain that need based on the what you have section. What have we added into the pot? So here we can see the client can sustain the income need all the way to 2061. But how does the cash flow work below here? So key things to think about when looking at this cash flow is it always runs for calendar years. So 1st of January to 31st of December. So the first year you see here, 2025, because we're in June now, it's running from June till the end of December. And then each year after that is running from the 1st of Jan to the 31st of December. And then for each, also, sorry, one other point to note here, all of the amounts you see are nominal future value amounts. You'll see that year on year. But if we go to this first year, what is it showing us? It's looking at what the client is contributing to their investments from now till the end of the year. And it's also bringing in the current value of those assets net of tax. And it's adding all of that together, and that's that figure that you see here. Now, there's actually an invisible column here, which is growth that you're not seeing. So it takes that amount, it adds the growth rates that you've applied on the target map, and that gets us to this end of year capital balance. In the following year, the client is still contributing to that pot of funds. So there we see the next year's contribution. That gets added to the pot plus growth, giving us the end of year capital balance in year 2. And so that continues year on year on year until we get to retirement. Now, again, retirement is usually set at an age. So it's when the client turns 65, which in this case is also halfway through the year 2040. And that's why you'll see here the client's drawing, but they're still contributing. The reason for that is for the first half of that year, they're still contributing, they then retire, and they start drawing from their capital. So sometimes in year 1, you'll see the amounts are slightly lower than you expected. It's just because it's for part of that year. So now we're deducting this amount from the capital, but we're still growing the capital, and we end the year on this 29 million amount. And so that continues. We keep drawing, but the capital is also still growing at the same time. And at some point, it starts reducing and we run out of capital. And that's where you see here in 2061, but that's the last year on the graph that we can maintain the income required. So that's how the cash flow works. And the key point I want to point out here is that you can also expand these sections. So you can see exactly what is included in this amount required, exactly which contributions are being included, and exactly which assets are being included. But the key point here is you can edit from here and show the client the impact of changes while you're working through those different variables and see the impact immediately on the graph. So for example, I can click on this retirement income and say, well, what if I adjust this slightly to let's say 600,000 a year, what would the impact be? And I can update it, and we'll see immediately on the graph that it now lasts longer. So straight from the cash flow, you can edit anything that's been included in the cash flow, whether that's the requirements under the what you want section, or the contributions, or the assets that you've allocated. All right. So I hope that brings a little bit of clarity in target maps in terms of things you can set up under what you want, under what you have, and how to engage the client through the cash flow, what it means for them, and what are the things we can do differently to move forward. But in addition to that, we can, of course, create additional scenarios. So maybe in one scenario, we're showing if you draw X amount, this is what it looks like. But then I can also, and I'm just going to change this back to 750. So that we can look at the other scenarios. Just going to pull it back a little bit. Now I can clone the scenario. And what that's going to do is make an exact copy. So you can see now I've got two retirement target maps. They're identical. But now I can either in preparation for the meeting or together with the client, I can adjust some other variables based on our conversation. Like, for example, what if we targeted a higher return? How would that impact the graph? If I go back here now, you can see I've got two, they're showing different outcomes. I can also reorder these target maps. I can have, this is the current, and this one is if we target a higher return. And I can rename the target maps. And I do that by just double clicking on the wording here. I can take out the word copy and say this is at a 10% return target, as an example. Okay. And now this page is starting to tell a story, and I'm working through that with the client. If we do this, this is the outcome. And you want to really empower the client to engage with you. Well, what if I save a bit more? Or what if I spend a bit less? Well, let's run it and work through it together. So let's see if we then clone this scenario, still target the 10%, but in this third option, let's see if we saved a bit more as well. And I can open it up, we'll go across to the what you have section, and I can add in additional savings. So here I've actually added a line item here for that already, to prepare for that engagement with the client, so I can simply select to include it. Okay, well, now we get to 100%. I can also change the name of the scenario here by clicking on settings, and I can simply type in here, this scenario is targeting a higher return and additional contributions. So now if I go back to this page, now I've got 3 different scenarios showing different options for the client, and we can talk through what is going to be the best option for them to take their steps forward. I can also compare them. So on the right here, I can select these checkboxes and I can select compare. And what that's going to do is bring up the 3 scenarios side by side. Now, again, this is to facilitate a conversation around what is the best options for the client? How do we take that next step forward? Is it targeting a higher return? Is it saving more? Is it spending slightly less? And we can work through all of that with the client in this comparison here. And I can edit from here as well, some of the variables, or even open up the target map if I want to edit more of those details. Okay. So that's target map comparisons. Okay. Then, once we've gone through that target map conversation, you'll see that I've added quite a few here as well for loss of life and disability. Let's assume in this conversation, we just focus on retirement. A good way of closing out the conversation and, reiterating what's been agreed, what are the steps that we're going to be taking, is bringing it back to the map. And this is where sidebar can be really powerful. I can talk through the client around, these are the things that we have in place already. These are the things we wanted to open conversation about. This is the target maps that we have explored and the options we've gone through. And I can just open it up here on the right-hand side in the sidebar. You'll see that there's also a couple of icons here. The first one is this eye icon. If I click on that, it's going to highlight on the map what assets or investments, financials are being included in that particular target map. So it's a great way of just reiterating. This is what we're using for retirement. Maybe this is what we're using in the event of loss of life, the impact of that. and just working through those scenarios with the client. But then I can also select a target scenario. So I can say to the client, based on what we've worked through and all the options that we've gone through together, once we've decided on which one we're aiming towards, which one we're going to implement, I can click this little target button, and that's going to set that specific target map as the one that we are trying to achieve. I can also pin target maps, so pin them up to the top of the screen, because those are the ones that have a level of importance, or perhaps a conversation I still want to have. So in this example, we can see that Shelley is still quite underfunded in death and disability, and perhaps I want to pin those two to say the next engagement we're going to have, these are the ones we really want to focus on, either in the next engagement or in the next step of the process. And then you'll see they've moved to the top. And right at the top of the screen here, I can select targets and just see the retirement one that we're targeting. This is especially useful for clients that you've done lots of scenarios for, selecting this is the one we've agreed to work towards. And then I can briefly, run through, we've pinned these. These are also ones that we want to work through in more detail, perhaps not in this engagement, but in the next one. But we can pin it to just separate that long list of target maps into what are we targeting, and what's the next conversation we want to have with the clients. Okay. The last way to sort of close out that meeting is to work through notes. Now, remember, you can add notes under an individual. So I'm just going to show you here. You can add notes here. And if I've got notes open in the sidebar and I flip to anything else, it'll automatically open the notes tab. So while you're working through this with the client, you can be jotting down the notes, the action items, what are the next steps. And a great way to finish off this conversation, once you've gone through the map, worked through the current situation, worked through the things you want to discuss, gone through all the variables and options with the clients and come up with a plan for them, is to just close off with what have we agreed? What are the action steps that we've agreed together that we're going to take forward from here? Right, I'm going to stop sharing the map and pop over into the presentation to close off.
And maybe just Kirsty, just quickly show that, just jump back to the asset map and show that flicking through the notes again, because I think it's so powerful to close out a conversation, just to summarize. So as Kirsty said, you can either go to the detailed notes, or if you know that there's a lot of notes already, then you can now just click into and say, so there's that personal note, but let's say, exactly like you're doing, but on the retirement, that's what we agreed, or on the unit trust, that's what we agreed. So it's a very quick way just to capture the essence of the meeting, to make sure that there's no misunderstanding.
Yeah, so if you've got notes open in the side panel for one, as you flip through everything, it'll just go straight into the notes and not all the detail above. So it works really nicely to just flip through and reiterate all the notes that you've agreed with the client and take that to the next step. All right. Okay. Stop share. In closing today, I just wanted to end by just reiterating what are the key benefits of planning together with the clients. And we've gone through a lot of practical steps today of how you can set that up, and what you can put in your map, and how to set up the target maps to really facilitate that conversation. But just to reiterate, it really enhances engagement. It brings the client in to become part of that planning process. That experience for them is enhanced, and most importantly, it becomes their plan. So they take more ownership and make those decisions that really help move them forward. Thank you so much for joining today.